Hello there. Give me just a moment. I'm just checking my feed. Feed. That's an interesting term for information being given to you, isn't it? It seems to imply that it's meant to satiate an appetite. Today's story speaks to a rather dark hunger. One that, if not satisfied, will lead to the end of the world. This is Influencer. TikTok shutting down is the worst thing that could happen to the world. No, I'm not one of those so-called influencers that use the platform to inform people about what cereal they ate on a particular morning and are now whining because that isn't considered a job skill anymore. I'm also not one of those people that were addicted to the app to the point that their children could climb out onto a roof while they were mindlessly swiping a phone screen. So don't mistake my words for any of that. TikTok shutting down is the worst thing that could have happened to the world because it's going to lead to the death of us all. I'm sounding like a madman. Everyone hearing this is going to think I'm completely insane. How the hell am I supposed to convince anyone of the truth when it comes off like this? Okay, just calm down. Tell the story. It's all that you can do. Oh, sure, tell them about the ancient space monster. That'll really convince them you're not a nut job. Okay, alright, so here we go. Countless millennia ago, far beyond what we as humans can even begin to comprehend, there was a race of beings. They lived in the void of nothingness long before the creation of the universe. They did so without form and without presence. Don't try to wrap your head around that. It all goes back to that we can't comprehend it thing. They existed in a way that we're never going to understand. This existence goes on for an impossibly long amount of time when suddenly, boom, the Big Bang happens. The universe explodes out of nowhere, flying outward at a mind-boggling speed to replace the nothing that had been there before. Obviously, nothing like this had happened before. The results of the encroachment of our reality had unpredictable results, especially for the beings that had been there first. Many, if not most, of them were wiped out due to being incompatible with the new universe. One of them, though, it wasn't erased by the universal expansion. Instead, one of those unpredictable results occurred, and it was instead rewritten from incorporeal to corporeal. Somehow, it adapted and became one with our universe. Such a process is highly unnatural, though, and even for something as immeasurably powerful as this being, it took a toll. The being went into a deep hibernation. As the endless years went on, matter from across the cosmos collected on the being's body like moss growing on an unmoving rock. Over millions and millions of years, it became completely covered. The buildup didn't stop there, though. It continued on until it formed a planet with the being at the center. Eventually, the new planet started to rotate. That led to an atmosphere being created. I'm sure you see where I'm going with this. Water formed, life began, and the next thing you know, we have Earth. Throughout all of this, the being still slumbered. After a long while, humans came along. We are the ones that woke the sleeper. Because of course we did. We humans have never found anything that we didn't fuck up given enough time. It took something special for us to unwittingly do this, though. It took the detonation of atomic bombs. Some things are so terrible that the universe itself takes notice. When multiple atomic weapons were set off, the explosions were felt even deep within the planet. That was enough to wake the being slumbering at the core. Not immediately. Waking up from a sleep that deep took time. Unfortunately for us, this time was measured in terms of decades rather than the millennia everything else in this story has taken so far. I don't know the exact date that the being reached full consciousness, It was sometime in the mid-90s, and if I had to take a guess, I would say it was during 1996. But again, that would just be a guess. That's a detail that doesn't really matter anyway. What matters is when the being woke up, it was hungry. While its body had taken on a physical form, its feeding habits weren't like anything else on this plane of existence. It fed on emotions, specifically negative ones. This world can be a truly crappy place, so it had basically been hooked up to a direct line to what it craved. Now that it was awake, it wanted more. Lots more. I'm not going to pretend to know the mind of such a being, but I think it found itself with a bit of a dilemma. It needed more negative emotions to feed its hunger, but if it emerged from its resting place, it would destroy the world around it and cut off its food source. It solved that problem in a rather interesting way. Sometime in early 1997, a man named Fred Talbot walked up to the gates of a supposedly top-secret military base in the Appalachian Mountains and demanded to speak to the base commander. He didn't resist when security placed him under arrest. Instead, he asked them to convey a single word to the base commander, stating that after the commander heard that word, he would definitely want to see Talbot. It turned out that Talbot was right. Whatever that word was, it instantly got the commander's attention, and he was granted an audience without anyone else present. Think about that for a second. A random stranger that had come onto a military base that no civilian was supposed to know about got a one-on-one meeting with that base's commanding officer without even a guard to protect him. I've thought about that meeting a lot, specifically what Talbot said to get it. What one word could have accomplished what it did? No matter how much I think about it, I just can't come up with an answer. When the conversation concluded, the course of history was changed. The base commander ordered that Talbot be treated as his second-in-command. This was followed with the threat that anyone that disobeyed that order would be thrown in a hole somewhere they would never emerge from. I'm not sure how he did it, but he also set into motion a series of events that would essentially erase the existence of the entire facility from all official channels. Funding and staffing would continue indirectly by siphoning from other military programs. It makes you wonder just how much stroke this guy had with the government, doesn't it? Whatever the case, that's where I came in. I was one of those people that were rerouted somewhere in the chain to that military base. It really didn't make any sense to me at the time. My degrees are in psychology and human behavior. What would a military base need for a government contractor with those credentials, especially one that had never served? You know those movies where they put a sack over someone's head so they can't see where their destination is? That actually happened to me. I showed up at the address I'd been told to arrive at for my assignment, and the next thing I knew, someone was putting a hood on me and dragging me to a waiting vehicle. Hours had passed by the time the hood was finally removed. That's when I got my first glimpse of my new home. The inside hallways of it anyway. I wasn't permitted to go outside, so I never saw the exterior. I was led into a large chamber. It was filled with monitors and computer terminals, all of them showing different sets of data. None of it made any sense to me, at least not initially. That was all cleared up by the project head. You'll notice that I'm not using any names here. That's a conscious decision. Most of the people involved with this were brought into it against their wills. They're not to blame for any of this. In fact, they should be applauded for keeping us all alive this long. The project head took me into his office and explained everything I've told you up to this point. He could tell that I didn't believe it, but he presented me with evidence that I simply could not deny. It was so convincing, in fact, that I was shaken to the core. There were multiple times that I had to stop him so that I could collect myself. Some of the evidence... No, never mind. I'm not going into detail. It's impossible to describe. You have to see it for yourself, and I have no way to send it to you. It's a miracle that I've got a simple audio feed going. The project head went on to tell me that the base commander had completely changed the purpose of the facility. Originally, it had been built around observing foreign countries, specifically their communications. The level of observation and data collection was well beyond that allowed under international law, hence all the secrecy. Talbot's appearance had changed everything. He was the unknown being's solution to the problem of its feeding, you see. The being was using him as a sort of ambassador to humanity. In a very loose sense, it had scooped out his mind and replaced it with its own. Talbot had made it simple. The being demanded that the level of negative emotions in the world be raised to satiate its constant hunger, or it would tear this planet apart before going off into the universe to find somewhere that met its needs. There really wasn't much of a choice. The only question was how to accomplish what the other wanted. That's what my fellow members of the project had taken to calling the being the other. It seems appropriate, doesn't it? To increase negative emotions on such a large scale, there needed to be some sort of drastic changes on the very large scale. At the same time, it couldn't be done in a way that alerted the general public that something was happening. That might lead to questions, which in turn could lead to inquiries. Can you imagine the panic if this got out into the world? The government couldn't know either. Those people couldn't be trusted with that kind of information. They would find some way to use it for political gain, and the secret would inevitably get out. To feed the other and protect mankind, the method would need to be extremely subtle. That's where I came in. Myself and the other experts that were brought into what was now being called Project Feedbag. Yeah, I know, not the coolest name, but it's pretty appropriate. We spent months coming up with a solution to this seemingly impossible problem. Every so often, Talbot would come check on our progress. His presence was, well, it was disturbing. There was no spark behind his eyes, and his movements were stiff and jerky. It was like being in the presence of a marionette that had come to life. He seemed to grow more impatient with each inspection. It was clear that we were running out of time. I don't know who came up with the idea. I think it was more of a joint effort than a single voice, but whatever the case, we latched onto it and knew that it was the only chance. No one thing was going to create the change that we needed. It had to be an emotional assault from multiple angles. It needed to be constant as well to continuously feed the other. The information consumed by the populace was the key. Keep in mind that this was the late 90s. The internet was just starting to really take off, but 24-hour news cycles and destination television were in full swing. People were consuming far more information on a daily basis than they ever had. To make people more miserable, we secretly manipulated the stories and media the general population was being presented with. That makes it sound a lot easier than it really was. Crews worked around the clock, not only at the base, but also in carefully selected positions in media organizations around the world, to make sure that more and more negative information was being pushed. One of my colleagues had the brilliant idea to expand our work into the political sphere. We nudged the various political parties away from center and towards more extreme viewpoints. That trickled down to their constituents, causing more friction and anger. The results came faster than we had anticipated. It turns out that the hardest part of changing a person for the worse is giving them an excuse to do so. Once you do, most people will handle the rest on their own. Talbot initially told us that the other was pleased with our progress. We went on for a few years before he changed his mind and told us that we needed to increase the negative emotions further. I remember feeling uneasy at this. I didn't know why. To meet this request, we sought to create more divides. We began creating and widening ideological divides as much as possible. Politics, regional disputes, religious disagreements, everything that we could think of. That satisfied Talbot for a while. Eventually, though, he demanded more. This time I had a solution at the ready. Social media was starting to really take off now, and that gave us the ability to reach more people than ever before. There also wasn't nearly the amount of scrutiny towards it as there was the mainstream media. A completely untrue and even unrealistic statement could spread like wildfire with people latching onto it like it was gospel. I didn't know just how out of control social media would become, and I certainly didn't anticipate there being as many platforms as there ended up being. At the end of the day, though, that was a positive for what we were doing. It made it easier to spread our message of discontent. That brings us to today. We're still a constant presence on everything from television to streaming services to good old-fashioned radio. Social media is easily our biggest category, which I'm sure comes as no surprise to you. Most of the planet is connected through the various social media platforms. The level of negative feelings is higher than it's ever been. But now, for the first time ever, we've lost one of our major sources. Probably the biggest single one, in fact. According to our analysis, TikTok accounted for the single highest amount of created and maintained negative emotions among all of our sources. In fact, the various content creators on TikTok did much of our job for us, as they would produce videos that were more vile and, to put it bluntly, stupidly uninformed than anything we could come up with. The loss of the platform was immediately noticeable. Our negative emotion production tanked. When the TikTok ban had initially been announced as a possibility, we'd hoped that its content creators would be smart enough to diversify and simply move their content to other platforms. It turns out that most of them are not that smart. Not all of them, some did as we expected. There are just so many that have proven to have no idea what they're doing. Yesterday, Talbot came to Project Feedbag and demanded to know why the others' feedings have been interrupted. I've never seen him enraged like that before. The other felt the disappearance of his TikTok sustenance. It's a need that we can't immediately fill again. I'm afraid that if we test the other's patience, the worst may occur and our world will end. That's why I'm breaking every rule, every single regulation to contact you. I have no doubt that I'll be executed the moment that someone finds out about this transmission, but it doesn't matter. What matters is making sure that the other is satiated so that this world continues on. Please, Mr. President, unban TikTok so that it can continue to be a cesspool. We desperately need the negativity.